Hi everybody, it's Bridget from the Clifton Institute. If you're getting this video, you probably either helped on a field trip as a volunteer, are a teacher who came on a field trip and brought your students here, or maybe are students listening to this. No matter who you are, thank you. I'm here to talk a little bit about what we found this spring on our research trips. So perhaps you came and looked at vernal pools, or you were studying our tree trail, which went around the pond and studied 6 species of trees. But I'm going to do a quick summary of what we found this year from all of the data that you all collected. Okay, here we are, the old familiar view, the peach house, the huge grandmother maple in the foreground. This is sort of what it looks like early spring at Clifton. So many of you hopefully got to see this view if you were here this spring. But before we get into the data, just some gratitude for all of the people that came out. We had kindergartners, we had college students, we had all ages of students come out and help. We also had a great team of education volunteers, including 2 interns, Isabel and Aiden, who collected a lot of the data that we used. So Isabel worked really hard on going out once a week to check our tree trail, and Aiden, a high school intern, is still going out once a week to check our vernal pools. So they have really helped with the data collection this year to supplement all of the data collected on field trips. And here are just a few photos of this spring. We have people walking the tree trail to go check on the dogwoods and persimmons. I can see persimmon, looks like persimmon 4 right here, filling in data sheets, doing a little bit of invasive plant management around our around our tree trail. And then of course, people at the pools looking for amphibian egg masses, measuring water depth, water temperature, water acidity, things like that, and wearing these sweet sunglasses. Okay, but when we're talking about spring, maybe we need to start by talking about weather. So how did our spring this year compare to past springs in terms of weather? So here are 2 graphs. The graph on the left is all about temperature. The graph on the right is all about rainfall. And they both show the temperature and rainfall of just January through May from the last 4 years. So in blue is 2022, in red is 2023, in yellow is 2024, and in green is this year, 2025. So if you look on the left, the graph of average temperature, you can see that this year was pretty average. It wasn't quite as warm as last year. Last year was very warm. You can see a lot of the yellow bars are really tall, especially in mid-spring. And it wasn't quite as cold, it looks like, as 2 years ago in 2023 in May. It looks like we had a very cool May. You can see in 2023 also we had a weirdly warm late winter. So like January, the average temperature was above 40 degrees. That's pretty crazy. And then it didn't get super hot that year. So it was kind of warm through the winter and warmish through the spring, not hot. And then if we look at rainfall, perhaps you remember, I think it was last week. Is that possible? Last week or the week before, when it just dumped rain. We got like 4 inches of rain in a day here at Clifton, which is a lot of inches. And you can sort of see that in this really tall green bar in May this year. So a lot of that was just one rain event. But it was pretty dry the rest of the months this year. You can see last year we had an incredibly wet January, but it was pretty dry by this time last year. We hadn't had rain. It sort of was rainy to begin with and then got less and less rainy through the spring. The next rainiest May was way back in 2022. So we've had 2 dry Mays in a row, which is interesting. And, when we're looking at the data later, you can think about like, why would that make a difference in vernal pools and in trees? So let's talk about vernal pools. Here's a picture of some eggs, probably some salamander eggs with little embryos inside, maybe just a week old. So how many egg masses did we find? So when students were going out, they were counting wood frog egg masses and then salamander egg masses. And we have 2 kinds of mole salamanders that live here. We have spotted salamanders and Jefferson salamanders, and we just lumped those 2 together because they are kind of hard to tell apart. But this was just how many total amphibian masses did we find in our 3 pools that we were surveying this year that had water in them. So the first one was Beaver Pond. The second one was Hughes Dip. and the third one was trifecta 1. And then in each column, you can see how many masses were found each year. And I put in bold the numbers of masses that was the most that have ever been found in that pool for the last 3 years. So what stands out to me at first is that for Beaver Pond and Hughes Dip, their max egg count was last year. For Trifecta 1, the biggest count of egg masses was this year. And in fact, it was twice as many. It had 41 egg masses in it this year compared to 19 and 21 for the past 2 years. So to me, this says that Trifecta 1 is getting eggier, and the other pools have maybe reached their max egginess and are going back down again. Again, it's hard to know with 3 years of data. We'll have to see what happens as we continue to monitor. This is just a short line, but it to me looks like Trifecta 1 is getting better and better. Okay, and I had told you that we have a high school intern, Aiden, who's going out to check the pools. He also takes photos of the pools. So if you came very early in the spring, if you came in February or March, it was probably not green at all yet. So I just want to show you what it looks like. We can go month by month. So here's what Beaver Pond looked like on the 8th of March this year. Here's what it looked like a month later, the 5th of April. You can see it's starting to green up. Unfortunately, a lot of the green you see are probably European species of plants, things like multiflora rose, but maybe a few of the willows are starting to leaf out too. Oh, I also totally missed, there are 2 geese in this picture. It's pretty funny. And then here it is in early May, the 3rd of May. So the water has gone back down a little bit, but there's all of this green, the trees are leafed out. And you can think about, like, what does a tree do for a pool? In some ways, leaves shade the pool from evaporation, but also trees are now transpiring. So they're using water to cook sugar basically in their leaves. And so they're starting to draw water out of the ground. So what effect does that have on water level? And if you went out today, it is even leafier, even greener. And the 3rd of May is before we had our big rainfall. So the water level has actually gone up quite a bit since right then. And we kept good track of that. This is a graph of the depth of water, and it's the average depth. So if you came here, you probably were measuring the depth at either a red pole or a green pole or a yellow pole. So we took those 3 numbers, we added those 3 depths together, and then we divided by 3 to find the average depth of the pools. And on this graph, you can see the depth over here in centimeters. And then the numbers on the bottom, the x-axis, are days after January 1st. So 20 means 20 days after January 1st. 40 means 40 days after January 1st. So sometime in February. I find it a little bit easier to read this than dates. It just means how many days into the year are we? The light blue, the lightest color of line in the next couple of graphs, is going to be the farthest back in time. So that was the farthest back we have data for is 2023. The middle blue color, middle color will be 2024, and the darkest color will be 2025. The stars mean when we found our first egg masses. So the first thing I think is interesting to notice is that for the past 2 years, the depth has gone down about the same time. They've started very full. There's been some sort of rain event that happens, mid-February, and then it dries out again. And in 2024, we had another rain event, it got full again, dried out again, got full again, dried out again. But in general, the dark blue line is a lot lower than either the middle blue line or the pale blue line. And you can interpret that as this year, the Beaver Pond was lower. The water level was in general lower than it has been the last 2 years. And you can also see on the middle blue line that the yellow star happens a lot earlier in the year. And that's because this year, we didn't find egg masses until about a month after we found the first ones last year. So we were about a month later this year for amphibian breeding season than we were last year. And I don't know which one is average. I don't know if last year was just really early or this year was really late. We need more data to know that. One theory that I heard a student say for why the beaver pond was much lower, each year seems to be lower and lower, is they were like, I wonder if the beaver dam is starting to break down. So in 2023, the beavers came and reinforced the dam, and then they haven't really been back since. So we're wondering maybe more and more water is leaking through the dam. And so that means that it's not holding water as well. And so it goes down faster. What an interesting thought. Okay, and here's Hughes Dip. So it's the pool that's right next to the road. And if you remember, it also is the eggiest pool. We had like 114 eggs in it egg masses in it this year. It has always been a very eggy pool. This is what it looked like in March. In April, starting to green up, grass is starting to grow. And then in May. So it completely dried. And unfortunately, this picture was taken after the egg masses had hatched. So there were tadpoles and salamander larvae swimming around in there that were still breathing with gills. They did not have lungs yet, and this dried out. So it's possible that some metamorphosed, they grew lungs and legs really quickly. Sometimes the dropping of water makes amphibians develop faster. We don't know. It's hard for us to know whether anything survived this pool. And now it is full of water again, but unfortunately it did dry out completely in between this and eggs hatching. And you can kind of see it that the same thing happened in 2024 too. It dried out completely. So it's been 2 rough years on Hughes Dip. We didn't have a lot of data from 2023. And again, you can see that eggs got laid a lot later when the water had already dropped pretty low. So it filled back up again, but it was after it got really, really low. And last but not least, trifecta 1. So there are also trifectas 2 and trifectas 3, but they did not have water for the breeding season this year. So we did not visit them or collect data because there were no egg masses because they were dry. So this is trifecta 1 in March, a month later in April, and crazily a month later in May. Super green, super lush. A new log fell down here. And if you visited Trifecta 1, maybe you remember seeing, there were a lot of wood frogs in Trifecta 1 this year, lots of wood frog tadpoles. We think there are Jefferson salamanders in Trifecta 1. So this is perhaps becoming a really good pool for many species of amphibians. Here's some random lines. Sorry, I don't know why those are there. So again, another trend, you can see that the dark orange line, which was this year, is pretty far below the past 2 years. So last year it stayed wet. The water stayed really high through mid-spring. This year it dipped down low, though it looks like its lowest was about 35 centimeters, which on me is like up to my knees. So it never got super dangerously dry, but it did get pretty low. And then it filled back up again. But you can also see it is our deepest pool. The average throughout the season is right around 60 centimeters. So that's a pretty deep pool. And here are some of the babies in it. So these are from, I think, last week, so mid-May. Aiden took these. So on the left is a wood frog metamorph, which means that it's kind of halfway in between tadpole hood and frog hood. It has 4 legs, but it still has a long tail. It's probably growing its lungs inside and it's not using gills anymore. So it's going to kind of resorb that tail into its body. But just like all teenagers, it's kind of going through a weird phase of its life where it's stretching out. And then we've got our salamander on the right, and we think this maybe is a Jefferson salamander because you can see it's got all 4 legs, and Jefferson salamanders lay their eggs before spotted salamanders do, which means they also hatch out before spotteds do. And so when you're looking in the pool and you find kind of a big chunky one, that might mean that it's a Jefferson's and not a spotted. It's been growing outside of its egg for a little bit longer, so it's a little bit bigger, but we don't really know. Anyway, 2 beautiful babies. Hopefully they will grow some lungs and get bigger legs soon and hop out of the pool. Okay, and then we looked at trees. So at the beginning, I talked a little bit about how trees affect vernal pools, but they affect every other part of our lives here in Virginia. Trees are the keepers of the seasons here. If you look outside and you look at your tree, that will tell you what season you're in. So we watch them as they're waking up from winter. That's what people were doing, was coming out and checking, how awake are you? Are your leaves open yet? Are your flowers open yet? Have your flowers gotten pollinated and are making fruit yet? That was what you were doing if you were checking on our trees. And one way to look at those data is to look at a graph like this. So same as the vernal pools, you have sort of time, the year, progressing on the bottom. So January, February, March, April, May, June, July. And then you have all these little lines. Each line is a record. It's someone's data sheet where they checked like Yes, I saw this thing happening. And in this case, I saw new leaves. I saw leaves growing. So this is a record where someone went out in mid-January in 2025 this year and were like, yep, I saw some leaves growing. And a good way to read it is to look for a really dense chunk of lines where there's like a lot of lines. That means a lot of people are finding the same thing, which is good. Someone might have looked at this pawpaw early in the spring and they weren't quite sure what a new leaf on a pawpaw looked like and checked it. Or maybe it really was an open leaf. It's hard to know. A lot of us are still learning how to do this. So the best way to look at this graph is read where the densest, thickest bands of color are, and that tells you when, in this instance, on a pawpaw, we were seeing new leaves growing. So kind of between mid-March and mid-May. On persimmons, in the orange lines, you can see the densest, most packed together lines are right here, sort of at the end of April, early May. So a little bit later than pawpaws. And then this bottom one is spice bushes, and you can see that we're seeing new leaves on spice bushes grow starting early March and going through the end of April, so even earlier. So it looks like it goes spice bushes, then pawpaws, then persimmons, based on this graph, which checks out with what I remember too. Here's another graph. This is just looking at dogwoods, but it's comparing two things. It's comparing first leaves versus open flowers. So leaves are in green, flowers are in pink. And you can also see it for the last 3 years. So on the left, this is just the data from Clifton's dogwoods. So these are just records of us here at Clifton saying, yes, I saw dogwood leaves. Yes, I saw dogwood flowers open. And you can see there's not that many bands. We don't have that much data. But when we add our data to the National Phenology Network, which is this huge national network of people all over the United States going out and checking, yes, I see leaves. Yes, I see flowers on my dogwood at home. If we add our data to people in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York, sort of around the mid-Atlantic, the East Coast, we get these nice big dark bands where we can start to see an actual pattern. And the pattern that I'm seeing here on the top, we have 2025 and 2024, 2023, and then the same for flowers. And what I'm noticing is that for the 2023 years, for both leaves and flowers, that the bands start much earlier. The dense bands are occurring earlier in the year. And that makes me think 2023 was an early year. 2024 and 2025 look pretty similar to each other in that they were maybe things started to open up a little bit later in the spring. And it looks like 2024 was maybe especially late. So this is one way to think about the data that we're collecting about trees when they're starting to wake up, is we can make graphs. Another way that I think is more approachable to us as humans who process pictures, we love pictures, is to look at our data from our chronologue. So if you ever came on a trip or a program and you saw a Clifton staff member maybe take a picture from like a little post sticking out of the ground that went out across the upper pond, towards the Peach House, that is a program called the chronologue, and it helps us get a picture from the same spot every day. So these are pictures from our chronologue from the teens of April, like April 12th through April 15th, for the last 4 years. And we can look and say, like, well, how green is it on this day each year? So we had said, looking at our graphs from the previous slide, that 2023 looked like a really early year. Plants were waking up really early. And so you can look at the pictures and say, does that check out? And to me, I think, like, yes, 2023 looks really green on April 14th compared to April 13th, just a day earlier, but a year later, it's like stuff has barely started to leaf out in 2024 on that same day. And same this year, maybe it's a little bit greener than last year on April teens, but it's nothing compared to 2023, which seems like a really early year. And then in 2022, where we don't have data from our tree trail, but we do have pictures, we can see it looked very green, kind of like 2023. So maybe similarly an early year. And that was even on April 12th. So let's look again at our weather. Okay, so something was happening in 2023 that made it really early, an early year for trees. We can look at temperature. So 2023 is the red. What I'm noticing again is that it was very warm in the winter. Average temperature for January and February was above 40 degrees. And then it didn't get really hot. It stayed kind of cool. For rainfall, it was kind of a low rainfall in January, kind of a high rainfall in February, low again in March, high again in April. So maybe there was something about that boom of rain in April that made everything leaf out. I don't know, mixed with a warm winter. I'm not sure. And then it got dry again in May. So it'd be interesting to look at the photos from May and see if this May looked greener than the May of 2023. Maybe stuff opened up, but it didn't really explode because then it got dry again. I don't know. Okay, so in summary, what did we notice this year? We noticed that 2025, this year, looked a lot like 2022 in terms of its weather. It's been cool with a dryish winter and a wettish spring. We learned in terms of our vernal pools that eggs were laid about a month later this year than they were last year. And that trifecta 1 seems to be getting better for amphibians. So we are seeing more eggs, more wood frogs, more Jeffersons, more spotted salamanders laying their eggs in trifecta 1. And we found that Beaver Pond didn't have that many eggs either year, but definitely going down. And Hughes Dip has been unsuccessful, at least the last 2 years, because it dries out early in the spring, before the frogs and salamanders are able to metamorphose and get out of there. And then lastly, we learned that trees leafed out about the same time this year as last year, but much later than they did in 2023, which was an incredibly early year. And we don't know why that is. We just have guesses. And you can turn a guess into a question. Like, I wonder if we will have a cool and wet or a hot and dry summer. We had a hot and dry summer last year, but maybe this year will be cool and wet instead. And what will that do to trees next year, I wonder? I'm also wondering, are deeper pools like Trifecta 1 better for amphibians when we have unpredictable rain? When we have a spring that might be really dry and not get wet until May, is a deep pool important for babies to develop? And is Trifecta 1 going to become the best pool ever and get eggier? And then for trees, I'm wondering, do they put their leaves out earlier after a warm winter? Is that what was happening in 2023, where we had kind of a warm January and February, and then we had the trees leaf out really early? Or did it have more to do with the rain? I don't know. I don't know. And the only way to know is that you have to keep going and making these measurements. We have 3 years of data for a lot of these things. We want to have 100 years of data. So when you come and collected data here, we keep that forever. And you can do that. Find a spot and watch it change through the seasons. So here's a picture from our chronologue in winter, and you can make all sorts of observations about it. Here it is in early spring, just leafing out. Here it is in summertime. This is what it looks like right now. Big and leafy and green. Here's early fall, probably September. The Indian grass is just starting to grow. Maybe late fall in October or November, everything's changing. The big grandmother maple is turning red. The Indian grass has seeds. And then again in winter, when everything has gone back to sleep again. So you can do this at home, no problem. And in fact, that's what we do here. So we keep photo records, we keep number records, like data that we write down, but we also just keep a journal. What happens every day? What do we see? What do we notice? When do the birds show up? You can learn what kinds of trees live at your house and just make a note on your calendar. If you have a wall calendar at home, write down like first day of leaves, first day of flowers for your maple tree or your dogwood at home or at school. You can set up a weather station. You know, you just get a thermometer and hang it from a tree or tape it to your wall. You can make a rain gauge. There are all kinds of ways to make rain gauges that you can look up. But really the most important thing you can do is share something you learned. Humans are really good at that. We're good at sharing information with each other. It's one of our great gifts. So share that gift. Share with somebody something that you learned, something that you saw. So thank you so much, everybody. Great year, such a beautiful, fun spring. I'm really looking forward to summer. I hope you get to see one of these beetles. It's my favorite animal. It's called a dogbane beetle, and the grown-up chews on the leaves of dogbanes, which is the milkweed relative. And they really do look like this. They're shiny and rainbow, and they should be coming out, according to our journal that we keep here, any day now. Late May is when we always see them. So I'm going to go check for some dogbane beetles right now. So you go do the same thing. And I hope I'll see you guys next year.